One of the last podcasts we did before the kind of pandemic hit and football was postponed in Scotland was about St Johnstone. I think it was just after they beat Rangers at McDermott Park, or did they draw? I can't remember. Anyway, they got a result against Rangers. I think it was a draw, actually, now that I mention it. And we talked about this player then. It's Ali McCann, who's number 13. I remember us going into a bit of detail that day. James, obviously, he's been another young player who's been huge for St Johnstone this season, playing in the middle of the park, scored some really important goals. What makes him kind of such a good player for you, and why is he so high up in this list?
Well, I think that pretty much from the get-go this season, he's been just excellent. I think, he's hit the ground running. He's been remarkably consistent in a St Johnstone team that, lest we forget, by end of November, start of December, they looked as if they were going down. I mean, they had an absolutely terrible start to the season, but even in that terrible team, McCann was still putting in good performances. Obviously, since then, their form has turned. They're now, they really actually started playing very well just before the league sort of shut down. And again, McCann was one of the players that was key to that. For players under the age 23 and under, he's one of the league leaders. He's the league leader in a whole bunch of metrics that you'd want a midfielder to be in. In terms of second assists, which is a pass that leads to an assist, he's got the third most in the entire league. Only Odsonne Edouard and Joe Aribo have more. In terms of interceptions, per 90, he's got the highest of any player, any midfielder under the age of 22. And I think one of the things that makes him stand out for me was, maybe it's a decent comparison, is that you look at someone like Lewis Ferguson, who I think has been getting a lot of plaudits this season, and rightly so. He's a very good player. But when you look at someone like someone like McCann, who, when you look at the stats of it, his defensive duels averages 9.3 per game, with Ferguson's only 7.64. McCann's success rate is 61.9%. Ferguson's is only 57.5%. And I think that they're not entirely dissimilar players in terms of their style of play. And I think it's important just to point out that while Ferguson has been playing at this level for, this will be his, third season in the Premiership? This is McCann's first. And I think that if he can start off so well and, really, he's controlling games in the middle of the park for St Johnstone. He's really box to box. He's excellent in defence. He's really positive in attack. And I think he's just really got it all, for a central midfielder. And I think that he's got a really big future in the game. I mean, this year as well, he's played in all but one game for St Johnstone. He's played, I think that was a League Cup game maybe, or a Scottish Cup game in the early rounds.
That's right, it was against, it was the Ross County League Cup game, you're right.
Apart from that, he's played every game. And, I mean, there's another stat that I looked at which I thought was quite interesting, which is the amount of progressive passes allowed. So that's a pass where the ball moves at least 10 metres up the park. And when you compare him to other young midfielders who play similar roles, his work is way, way better. I mean, he only allows 5.55, but that's better than the likes of Kyle McGuinness. It's better than the likes of Alan Campbell. It's better than Lewis Ferguson. And these are all sort of contemporaries who've had a couple of years already. So I think that there's a lot of promise there, and I think that he's only going to get better and better.
I think, as you say, the thing that stands out for me is just as well, for him to be his kind of first proper season and he's played every league game for St Johnstone or featured in some sort of way, that's pretty remarkable. And I know he's obviously loved by the supporters there, and they say he's better than Zidane and stuff, which is obviously high praise indeed. Stefan, what are your thoughts? Obviously, he's shown even against bigger teams, it doesn't really matter. It's not as if he's just doing it against the teams around St Johnstone or kind of teams who are relegation fodder. He kind of steps up. I mean, what do you think? Is there anything you'd like to add that James maybe hasn't added there?
I think a lot of the stats I've jotted down are kind of the same as what James already quoted, so I won't bore listeners with those, but I think what really stands out to me is that he's such an outstanding playmaker in such a bad team when it comes to scoring goals. And I don't mean to be too disrespectful to St Johnstone, because in one of the previous podcasts we had talking about Jason Cairn saying how they were outstanding defensively, and that's kind of how Tommy Wright's always done well at St Johnstone. But I think what really stands out to me is that in a team that have really, really, really struggled to score goals this season for a number of reasons, it struck me that even despite that, McCann has still kind of came through this with flying colours, and it does kind of pose a question, and this will just anger St Johnstone fans, just how well he could do in a better team, or at least a team that are better suited to scoring goals. Just look at his numbers. Obviously, he's. I think James mentioned this already. Third in the league for second assists. He's got, as far as Wyscout can tell me, he's got 11 shot assists, which means passes leading to a shot and things like that in the league this season. So he's undoubtedly their fundamental creator in terms of creating chances and goals. And I think it's as well as the fact that he alone's been able to contribute this in terms of his own ability. I think it's St Johnstone do deserve some credit, or at least Tommy Wright deserves a bit of credit, because maybe 2 seasons ago he was looking at a team that was ageing very quickly and very badly, and he had to go back to the drawing board and basically decide to start again and bring a new generation of players through. And that's obviously where McCann has been able to step in and kind of take advantage of that. And I think Tommy Wright gets, I think he gets a lot of praise as well, to be honest, but I think he probably gets a wee bit of criticism for being this kind of older manager who's stuck in his ways. But he's managed to kind of take McCann, and he's really, really, really done a great job in giving him the space and time to progress at St Johnstone. And along with maybe Kerr, maybe someone like Alan Hendry, if the club can play their cards right, they can make a lot of money off the 3 of those down the line. And maybe that's not obviously what fans want. Fans want to be able to say, we've got these guys, we're going to go off and win League Cups with them or whatever have you. But it's a really strong attribute. I think the club deserve a lot of credit, and Tommy Wright deserves a lot of credit for not just bringing McCann through, but these other young players through, and allowing them to thrive. And I think McCann is just another one who's going to go on to bigger and better things. And without trying to piss off St Johnstone fans, I'm really excited to see what he can do at a bigger club down the line.
The thing is, a lot of St Johnstone fans I see say or think he's still quite underrated by everybody else, and he kind of flies under the radar, which I'm sure they'll be happy with to an extent. If he flies under the radar, they'll keep him for a while. But do you think there's any truth in that, James, that he's still slightly underrated on the whole?
It's always hard to tell with these things, isn't it? Because a lot of the opinions you see on these kind of things, are certainly the ones that I see, are on Twitter, where obviously it can be an echo chamber where, I follow a few different sort of analytics accounts and that kind of thing, and Ali McCann's very highly regarded by a lot of the people that I follow. So I don't really, so as far as I'm concerned, I'm like, people know how good he is. But I guess then maybe when you talk to maybe Celtic fans or Rangers fans who only see him, 3 or 4 times a season whenever they play him, it's, a lot of these players can fly under the radar. But I think for clubs, I think most fans of most clubs in the Premiership recognise that Ali McCann is fantastic, and possibly a front runner for Young Player of the Year this season. I don't think that's too far to suggest. I think that he'll certainly be in that conversation, and I think that a lot of fans know that as well. But it is hard to gauge on how much the wider Scottish football community rates them, because I don't know. Like I say, I'm sort of in my wee bubble on Twitter, so I can't really tell.
No, fair enough. Is there anything you'd like to add, Stefan, before we move on?
No, about James's bubbles. No, I think I'm okay.
Yeah, I think we'll leave the bubbles in the past firmly.